music, stress, and mental health. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And a big thank you to Kira. She's actually controlling the slides for me. So you may hear me saying from time to time, okay, next slide. So thank you, Kira. Anyway, so this is the overview of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to talk about stress in general. We'll talk about health, specifically mental health. Then we'll move on to music. We'll talk about its healing properties, how to use it for expression, and then a few strategies to help you learn how to use music to achieve these goals. So let's go ahead and move on to talk about stress. Stress is, I like to say, it's inevitable. You literally cannot survive life without experiencing stress. I mean, even babies cry, right? Everyone experiences stress at some point in their life. So what stress is, it is a response to a challenging event. It is natural. It's a manageable part of life. And it occurs when life's requirements exceed our capabilities, resources, or our needs. Now, what I mean by resources include time, energy, skills, financial resources, social support, etc. Basically, anything that can help you deal with the stress, those are your resources. So if we move on to the next, I have a little bit of a diagram here, hopefully to help you understand stress a little bit better. So here you will see two circles. On the left-hand side, you'll see one that says resources. So again, these are your helpful things like time, social support, and so on. And on the other side, you have your demands. These are the things that create stress. So the things that are expected of you or the things that you have to do. For example, homework, that's a demand. Paying bills, that's a demand. Anything that requires your attention, those are demands. So when those two circles are balanced and your resources and your demands are equal, that means you have no stress. So let's move on. And then the next one is, you'll see, it might look a little bit familiar, but a little bit different because of the difference in size. So over here, you will see that same circle on the left-hand side, resources, except now it is much smaller than the demand circle. So in other words, when your demands are larger than the resources you have available to you to deal with them, that creates stress. Now, there are ways to regain balance. The way that you regain balance is there's actually two methods to do that. The first one is you either enhance your resources. So for instance, you create more options for yourself. Let's say the resource we're talking about here is time, and let's pretend that we weren't in a pandemic right now and you were all going to school as well as working. You have finals coming up, you need to study. You don't have the resource of time, so you ask your boss to cut back your hours a little bit, at least for the foreseeable future, or ask coworkers to pick up some shifts for you so that you can devote more of that time to studying. So you've increased your resource of time. The other strategy is to actually reduce your demands. So for instance, if you have a group project that you need to work on, you divvy up the tasks for that group project. Now it's no longer just up to you, right? You can rely on your group members to hopefully make that project a little bit more manageable. So now you've decreased your demands. So in other words, you have a choice. You can either increase resources or decrease demands to regain that balance. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about the different types of stress. And the truth is there are 4 types of stress. Usually we think of stress as just one thing, but stress can either be positive or negative. So the positive stress that we have here, it's called eustress. Again, stress is inevitable, but there are those types of stressors that do motivate us. For example, if anyone's thinking about graduate school, those grad school applications, they are stressful, but they motivate you because you want to go on and advance in your academic career. Positive stress tends to be short term. It can be really exciting. It can feel rewarding, and it can actually improve your performance as well. Now, the negative stress, this is the one that people usually think of when you're talking about stress, and this is called distress. So what distress does is it actually causes frustration, anger, sadness, etc. Basically, any of those negative emotions you don't want to be feeling caused by distress. It does tend to be longer term. It can lead to a decline in performance, and it can create physical symptoms, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But let's move on to the next 2 types of stress. stress can be either internal or external. So external would be a threat or a perceived threat to your physical safety. So you have that little clip art there, right, of that man kind of grabbing that boy with the shirt. That's an external stressor. Internal is a threat that is to your internal world. So this is more like your thoughts. If you're sitting there ruminating about the what ifs, like what if I said the wrong thing? What if my friend judged me for this or that? What if they don't want to be my friend anymore? That's just one example. But these are the more internal ones that are kind of in your head or in your own internal world. So let's talk a little bit about how do you know when you're stressed? I mentioned earlier something about physical symptoms, right? So this by no means is an all-inclusive or comprehensive list. These are just some physical symptoms that can kind of indicate that maybe you're experiencing a little bit of stress. And I won't go into these in depth or anything, but you might recognize some of these. Headaches, indigestion, fatigue, hypertension, bodily tension. I know for me, I get a lot of tightness in my shoulders when I'm stressed. Floating anxiety, insomnia, pain in your neck or back, changes in appetite, and nightmares. We have an additional few symptoms. They're not just physical. So if we move on to the next slide, you will see that there are also cognitive symptoms and emotional symptoms. And again, I won't go into these in depth, but the cognitive symptoms include scattered attention, some forgetfulness, indecisiveness, or obsessive thinking. And the emotional symptoms include anger, impatience, irritability, anxiety, depression, and loss of motivation. Now, again, none of these are comprehensive lists by any means. So you may experience some of these, you may experience none of these, you may experience something that hasn't made it onto either one of my lists. These are just some examples to kind of get the gears going, so to speak, and get you thinking about it. So let's talk a little bit about why is managing stress so important. High levels of stress have a negative impact on health and well-being, so general overall health and well-being. And individuals with high levels of stress tend to have higher rates of physical ailments as well, which is kind of interesting to think about, that if someone is really stressed out, you'll often hear that stress is kind of a risk factor for strokes and heart attacks. So yeah, people who don't learn how to manage their stress definitely can experience a lot more physical ailments. All right, that said, before we get to the fun stuff with the music piece, right, let's talk a little bit, or rather, let's take a little bit of a pop quiz. And you're not going to be graded on this. You don't have to take notes or anything like that. You don't have to write anything down. This is more of kind of a mental check-in with yourself. So let's find out, are you stressed? Let me tell you a little bit about the Loma Linda stress test. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, so the Loma Linda stress test, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it was a test created by these psychologists who were researching how stress can affect perception. So what they did is they took a group of participants and split them into two groups. And the first group was called the pleasant condition. So all of these participants were recruited to come in, and they thought they were going in for a general doctor's appointment. And the first group was exposed to the condition where the people at the front desk were really friendly, were really helpful. The environment was comfortable. There were snacks and water. The appointment started right on time. Everything that could have gone right for this appointment did. Now, the other group was called the unpleasant condition. So again, same sort of thing. They thought they were coming in just for a regular doctor's appointment, but they were encountered with, they were rather faced with unpleasant conditions. So what I mean by that is the front desk staff was really rude. It was uncomfortably warm in the room. There were no water, no snacks, and the appointment started about 20 minutes late. So of course, anybody would be aggravated in that situation. And what they ended up doing was they had their appointment, so to speak. And after their appointment was done, the psychologist gave them a little bit of a test. And they showed them a picture, which I will show you in just a minute. But they showed a picture, and they asked each participant to rate the amount of differences. I'm sorry, two pictures. One picture with two objects. So they asked each participant to rate the differences they saw between the two objects. And what they found is that people who were not stressed, meaning most of the participants in the first condition, only saw between, on average, 1 to 2 differences between these two identical objects. The stressed out condition, or the unpleasant condition, same thing. They were asked to rate how many differences they saw. And on average, they actually saw between 9 to 10 differences. Now remember, this was a picture of two identical objects. So the results of that, or the outcome of that experiment, was that people who are more stressed do tend to see more differences, and therefore their perception is distorted. Now we're going to go to the slide in just a minute, but before we do, I want you to take note. I'm going to show you the exact picture that they used in that test. And I want you to just take a mental note. How many differences do you see? If you see closer to 1 or 2, you're not very stressed out at all. If you see closer to 9 or 10, then the theory is that you are very stressed. So Kira, if you can go ahead and show that picture. So please take note, between these two identical objects, how many differences do you see? Clearly, this is a joke because you see a dolphin and a cow. And if anyone sees 2 dolphins or 2 cows, then please talk to me afterwards. But basically what this is, it's just a joke. It's just pointing out that everybody experiences stress. So let's go to the reality check on the next screen. The struggle is real, right? Everyone experiences stress. In fact, let's talk about some statistics on the next slide just to show how prevalent stress really is, and this is specific to college students. So during the course of one semester, more than 60% of college students reported feeling so stressed they couldn't get all their work done. Over 50% reported feeling so stressed that they didn't want to hang out with their friends on one or more occasions. More than 80% of university students, sorry, I lost my place. More than 80% of university students are struggling with psychological distress, and 50% of undergraduate students reported experiencing more than average or tremendous stress in the past year. So some of this may sound familiar to some of you. This, I hope, really shows and emphasizes how common stress really is, particularly for university students. So in other words, let's move on. In other words, stress can take a significant toll on a person's mental health. Now, I feel like mental health is one of those buzzwords that people just kind of throw around. And in fact, I would say it's so common nowadays that half the time people don't even know exactly what that means. So I'd like to define that so that we're all on the same page. But before we talk about mental health, let's move on to the next slide and talk about what is health specifically, because that kind of lays the groundwork. How can we understand mental health if we don't understand basic health first? So according to the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, right? So hopefully you can all see that triangle that's there. It has mental, social, and physical. These are all components of overall health. So now that we know what health is, let's move to the next slide and talk about specifically mental health. Mental health is a state of well-being in which individuals realize their own potential, they can cope with life's stressors, they can work productively, and they can make contributions to the community. So again, because this is a webinar, I'm not able to get audience participation, unfortunately, but I do want you to start thinking about how do you cope with stress, because we're going to talk about some coping strategies. But maybe just, again, take a mental note. How do you cope with stress? See if any of them made my list. If they didn't, I'm always welcoming to suggestions. And if you see some new ones, hopefully then you can try to implement these. So let's move on to the next. How does music relate to mental health? Music is one of the only activities that activates, stimulates, and uses the entire brain, which is interesting because you hear a lot of times people talking about whether they're right-brained or left-brained, or they're more artistic, or are they more logical, because then they're more likely to rely on one side of the brain versus the other. But there have been multiple studies that have looked at brain scans of people who have been engaging with music one way or another, whether listening to it, playing it, and they have found that music does stimulate the entire brain. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about music. Music is enjoyable across ages and cultures, and it has become increasingly accessible and popular. What I mean by that is I'm going to throw a few more statistics at you here. Estimated retail revenues from recorded music grew 11.4% from 2015 to 2016. And much of that growth came from subscriptions to streaming services, so things like Spotify, right? By the first half of 2016, that growth was already at 8%, which represents the strongest music industry growth since the late 1990s. That's according to the Recording Industry Association of America. Teens and early college students are among the most active consumers of music, and that is because traditionally this age group identifies listening to music as a primary activity. In fact, I would say that adolescents identify listening to music as their most frequently used strategy for coping with stressful life events. So in other words, music seems to be more of a natural coping skill for adolescents. Okay, so let's talk about music as a coping skill, or rather coping strategy. Music is an important part of daily life. Some people jam out when they're sitting in their daily commute, sitting in traffic during rush hour. They have their own little personal concert. Other people do it in their shower. They turn their shower into their personal concert with their shampoo bottles and conditioner as their audience. Some people pair it with working out. And yeah, as I mentioned, it is one of the most commonly used coping strategies for adolescents and college students. So people do integrate music into various activities in their life, which is pretty cool, I think. The other cool thing about using music, if we go to the next slide, is that it does improve the overall quality of life. My favorite part is that it is not genre specific. So regardless of whether you're listening to rock, rap, country, classical, whatever, you'll get benefits from it, because what matters more is not so much the genre itself or what you're listening to. What matters is whether you enjoy it. And of course, that's subjective. So regardless of genre, you will get the positive effects. And I think the most helpful part for people like me is that there's no talent required to actually engage with music. You don't have to be good at it to enjoy it. Okay? So let's talk about, now that we've talked a little bit about music itself, let's talk about music and mental health specifically. Music can have a wide range of positive effects for mental health. Or for health in general. They can be physical, mental, emotional, which I did kind of briefly talk about that before. It improves the overall quality of life, and it is an excellent form of self-care. Now, on the next slide, you will see that I included a slide just on self-care itself, because much like mental health, I feel like this is a little bit of a buzzword too. It's one that a lot of people throw out, and half the time they're not totally sure what that means. They kind of have an idea. But again, just to get us all on the same page, I do want to clarify what self-care actually means. Self-care is any activity that we do deliberately to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. And it does refuel us, so it makes us feel better. Okay, so now that we know what self-care means, let's talk about the benefits of music. There are a lot of benefits of music. And again, this is whether you're listening to it, playing with it, or otherwise engaging in music. It does decrease depression. It decreases stress and anxiety. It also decreases feelings of isolation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It improves heart rate and other health problems. It improves communication, can foster a sense of identity development and belonging. It increases a sense of validation, and it can improve sleep. And provides a sense of catharsis. Now, before we move on, actually, there are a couple of these points that I want to go in a little bit more depth with. The first one being how music can improve communication. So that's that bottom bullet point on the left-hand side. If you think about it, music tells stories, right? So whether you're a songwriter and you're putting your feelings, your thoughts, your message into a song, it's a great way to use it for communication. Or even if you're not, I know that I have worked with a lot of clients who have wanted to get a certain message across to someone important in their life, whether it's a partner, parent, sibling, but haven't really been able to find the words to do so. And so they will end up using music to help them with that communication piece. And when we talk about some strategies, I'll give you some examples of how that happens. The fostering the identity development, which is the next bullet point on the other side, that sense of belonging. If you think about it, depending on what type of music you're into, a lot of times that does come with its own style, so to speak, whether it's clothing style or your attitude. And then you meet other people who share those interests with you, and it does create this sort of sense of belonging. Increasing sense of validation, and actually I think this hits that isolation piece that decreases feelings of isolation as well. These two are related. So basically what that means is that sometimes if a person is experiencing something, whether sadness, depression, anxiety, it can feel very, very isolating. And a lot of times you can feel like you're the only person in the world going through this. But if you end up playing a song that has just the right message to it and really resonates with those internal experiences, then suddenly it's not so isolating. Because even if you haven't talked to anyone else about it, you know that somewhere out there, whether it's the songwriter, the singer, the band, whatever, you know that somebody else got it because those lyrics really hit you, and it validates what you're experiencing. Okay, so on that note, let's talk about some strategies. And I have a couple of strategies here, and I will say this, these are not comprehensive by any means. Most of them you can do on your own time without any guidance, of course. So first one being music listening, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's literally just listening to music, because that in and of itself can feel really good and it can be very enjoyable. Lyrical communication kind of goes to what I was talking about when I gave that example of someone using music to communicate. So again, I don't want to repeat the example or anything. And actually, I'm going to give you a second example, something to listen to in just a minute. But basically what that is using lyrics to get a certain point across. And there's another one called lyrical analysis, which I didn't include here. This one is more for professional settings. But basically what that is if you're not really sure how you're feeling, but there's a song that for some reason really hits you just the right way, sometimes analyzing those lyrics can be really helpful. Like, how do those lyrics relate to your life? What do you take from them? And it can lead to a sense of clarity. Then we have songwriting. Again, another one that's super straightforward, just putting your thoughts, feelings into some songs for the purposes of expression to get those thoughts and feelings out. Then we have active music engagement. And this is a form of physically interacting with music, whether that's playing an instrument, singing, or even dancing. All of these have positive effects, especially the more physical ones, because then you get the benefits of exercise too. And actually I did include singing as a separate category, but it kind of does fall into the active music engagement as well. And then the last one is music-assisted relaxation, which a lot of times people do learn in professional settings, like in therapy, for example. What that is when someone uses relaxation exercises, like deep breathing, for example. A lot of times, you'll listen to some sort of meditation or someone guides you through the deep breathing strategy. Music-assisted relaxation is pairing that with music to enhance the benefits of relaxation. So I want to give you a quick example. If we move on to the next slide, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm about to do, or what I'm about to play for you here. And this gets at the piece of both, well, I guess 3 different strategies: music listening, because we're all going to listen to it right now, lyrical communication. The reason this falls under lyrical communication is because the song I'm about to play for you is a song by this man named AJ McLean. He is one of the members of the Backstreet Boys. He did his own solo project where he kind of ventured off on his own and wrote this song, which is actually really moving. Now, I don't expect anyone to be familiar with who AJ is, but let me tell you a little bit about his background, just so you can hopefully better understand where he's coming from with this song clip that I'm going to play for you. So AJ's parents divorced when he was 4 years old. His father disappeared from his life. They had no contact whatsoever. Then when he was a teenager, he joined this band called the Backstreet Boys, which at first, nobody really listened to, because at the time the United States was really listening to Nirvana and more like the grunge rock. Backstreet Boys didn't fit in their pop music. But lo and behold, fast forward a few years, AJ's now 19 years old, and the Backstreet Boys all of a sudden blew up, and they were on the cover of all sorts of magazines all over the world. And who do you think comes knocking all of a sudden? His father, who he had not seen or otherwise had any contact with since he was 4 years old. And all of a sudden, it was a story of AJ, oh my God, I've missed you so much. I can't believe I've missed out on so much of your life. I want to be a part of your life. Please, can we build a relationship? Now, AJ was very hesitant about this, but he always wondered what it was like to have a father. So he decided to let him in and let him into his life, right? And so AJ one day shows up at his dad's house and he walks in and he sees not only does his dad have posters of the Backstreet Boys all over his walls, but he finds out at some point that his dad was running a Backstreet Boys fan club, which is really questionable. In the end, I'm not totally sure in the details, but their relationship didn't pan out. They don't really talk anymore. But all of this was a very confusing time for AJ and a very hurtful time. So what he did is he channeled all of those feelings into a song that he wrote about his relationship with his father. So he communicated those emotions through his lyrics and wrote a song. So we're gonna, again, going back to the strategies we talked about, we're gonna listen to it. So music listening, lyrical communication, because that's what AJ was doing, and songwriting with this beautiful song that he wrote. It's called Sincerely Yours. So I'm gonna have Kira flip to the next slide, and I'm actually going to play it on my end. Hopefully it's not too fuzzy, but just in case, I have the lyrics here. So please follow along if you can't hear it very clearly, and just think about what it might have been like to be AJ writing this song. It looks like there's a little bit of a delay on my end, so give me a second.
All you left me was my name. I know you wanna be in my shoes. So how does it feel? How the tables turn. You can learn how to live without me. Live without me. Pictures up on the wall. Suddenly now you're all about me. All about me. Where were you when I needed you? Only thing that I learned from you is how to walk out the door. Sincerely yours, I just wanna forgive and forget all about you. I can't just move on from this place in between. Loving and hating you, nowhere to belong.
Okay, so that's the clip, and I just want to spend just a little bit of time, I guess, talking about that. Hopefully, as you can see with the lyrics here, there's a lot of confusion here, particularly where he says, I just want to forgive and forget all about you. Why can't I just move on from this place in between loving and hating you with nowhere to belong? First time I heard that, I was just blown away by the emotional content in that. You know, and I should have mentioned that when AJ wrote this song, he was already in his late 20s. So these are all emotions that he had been stuffing for many, many, many years. And it came out in this song, which, interestingly enough, I was able to see him perform this live. And it was the first time he'd ever tried to perform it. And he couldn't even keep his eyes open during the song. And he was crying as he was singing, which, you know, again, I don't expect anyone to really know who AJ is, but if anyone knows what he looks like, this is a man who is covered in tattoos, pretty much head to toe. He's known as like the bad boy of the group. So to see him actually break down and crying was something that was incredibly unexpected, but it was something that to me really demonstrated the power of music and how it can, in many ways, almost force people to experience things that otherwise, you know, they might not experience or might not be open to being vulnerable about. So I thought that was really cool. Now on that note, before we go on to the next slide, there was actually one more thing that I wanted to mention that completely slipped my mind. But as far as the piece about music creating a sense of belonging, I think particularly with the time that we're in right now, with this pandemic that we're all experiencing, there are a lot of opportunities being created. As tough as things are, and as much as, You know, some people really might be struggling with the social isolation piece. There have been some really cool things happening as far as music goes. And again, creating new opportunities to do things that we really haven't seen before, haven't experienced before. And one of the reasons I forgot to mention this is because this is coming from the result of a conversation I had earlier today with a client during one of our sessions. And, you know, I made sure to kind of explain what I was doing today and asked her if I had her permission to share this, which I do, thankfully. And she actually wanted me to plug it for her. But basically, she was talking about how she was or is a One Direction fan. And clearly a lot of fans or just people in general are experiencing that social isolation piece. So some other One Direction fans somewhere created this just giant Zoom meeting where I think she said it was, can't remember if she said hundreds or thousands, but multiple people got together over Zoom to listen to One Direction music all together. And she described it as a really fun, really positive experience that enabled a lot of bonding, which I think is so necessary during this time. So, and I know that there have been other bands doing similar things. I caught wind of, I think it was like a Elton John concert that he put together that was streamed over NBC, I think it was, or Fox, something like that. But multiple different recording artists got together and submitted videos of them singing their hits and did this special that was really cool and really fun to watch. So I think it's cool how artists are doing their part, or at least trying to do their part, to bring people together and to share some joy through music. So for anyone who did or who is interested in the One Direction thing, again, she wanted me to plug this. So since she gave me her permission to share her story, I thought that in return, I would plug this for her, even though it's not hers. She just thinks it's a lot of fun. So if anyone's interested, you can look up the hashtag, or it is hashtag 1D, obviously the number one, right? D as in direction. So 1D Zoom concert. And that's how you can access that. All right, let's get back on track then. Kind of veered off there. So let me leave you with a little bit of a word of caution here, because I know I've really emphasized how music can be very healing. It has all these benefits, but just like with anything else, there's pros and cons, right? And with music particularly, it is extremely important to know that music alone is not enough. And what I mean by not enough, it's not enough to save you, so to speak. I mean, for some people it really is, but you can't bank on that. For most people, it does require a little bit more if this is what you're really trying to use or utilize to really maximize on your mental health. Other coping and self-care strategies are essential, whether that means, again, exercise, eating well, making friends, and utilizing that social support you have. It's really essential to use that in addition to the music. And yes, social support, in fact, is so important that it got its own bullet point there. And the reason I'm saying this is because at the very bottom, I don't know if any of you will recognize some of these people that are in those pictures right across the bottom. Unfortunately, these were all very incredible, very talented artists who we were lucky enough to have their music for a few years and who unfortunately are no longer with us. And all of them actually died by suicide. And the reason I thought that this was important to include here is to really emphasize that point that music alone is not enough. If it were, we would have all of these people still with us here today. So please prioritize your mental health. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Music is great, but it's not the end all be all. So make sure you're using those other coping and self-care strategies as well. All right. So in short, just a quick little summary of all the stuff that we've talked about. Hopefully I haven't lost too many people through all of this. But in short, music has a variety of benefits for health. It can help express your thoughts and emotions. It is useful across diverse populations. There are multiple strategies to choose from, and it requires no special skills to use music one way or the other. There are professional mental health services available via music therapies, or music therapists, I should say. And I realize I didn't really talk about that, but for anyone who really does want to use music in a more professional setting, that can be done. You may find a psychologist like myself, for example, who is really into music. I regularly integrate music into my practice with my clients. We do a lot of the lyrical analysis that I was talking about, but if you want to make it a focus, there are music therapists who do exactly and primarily just that. And music should be used with other coping skills, self-care strategies, and social support for optimal health. So with that said, I do want to spend just a little bit of time talking about where I work, University Counseling Services, just in case anyone is in need of any additional support. University Counseling Services is here for you to provide that. Now, I know with everything going remote, things have been a little tough, and no surprise, UCS has gone remote as well. So we are offering services via Zoom phone or Zoom audio, Zoom video. We do it for phone sessions as well, though Zoom is preferable even if it is audio. Typically, we are located in Baramian Hall, room 520. You may be able to tell by my background, that's not where I am today, but that's where we are located when we're actually on campus. Our hours are Mondays through Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We typically do have urgent assistance or walk-in appointments available, but since we've gone remote, if you need some urgent assistance, particularly after hours, we do have access to a live counselor who can help you out. The way to get a hold of our live counselors would be to call protocol. So you have our main line there, that 818-677 number. That's our front desk. So if you wanted to schedule an appointment, you can go ahead and call the front desk and we'll be happy to assist you. But again, if it is after hours, you would just call that and select option 3 to get connected with one of our after hours counselors. Because let's be real, not all crises happen between business hours, right? So that's an additional way we try to support all of our students. If you want more information, there is the link to our website down there at the bottom, so you can access more about our services and anything else that you may need. So with that said, I would like to turn it over. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take those. I'm not seeing any. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions come in. I am seeing a suggestion from one of my colleagues here that there is a crisis text line. Thank you, Allison, for pointing that out. There is a crisis text line that you can text as well for anyone who's not comfortable with phone. It is 741741, which I will go ahead and copy here so everyone has access to it in the chat. 7417. Here we go. Okay, so if anyone needs a crisis text line, it is there. And I do see one question. Let me just scroll up. What are some of my favorite mental health songs? Ooh, that's a really good question. I have to say Linkin Park probably has some of my favorites. Numb is probably up there. Oh my goodness, you put me on the spot there, Allison. I'm trying to remember. Gosh, I'm just blanking.
Sorry
Keep up with everyone's questions here. Numb would probably be the one that comes to mind first.
There's another one by The Fray that I really loved. What is it? Save a Life. You know that one?
Oh, Save a Life is great. Yes, yes. So Save a Life, and I'm glad you actually bring that up because those are two way different songs as far as the content. So Numb is more about like the emotional expression piece, like someone feeling so angry or depressed or, you know, that sort of negative emotion that people typically don't want to be experiencing. Numb is a great way to sort of express that. But Save a Life is more on the positive end of the spectrum. So I think it's really cool to point out how music can achieve different goals, whether it's just for expression to get those feelings out or to maybe instill some hope. So awesome. Happy by Pharrell, I'm seeing from, is that Yukiko Bryant? Thank you. Yes, Happy is great. That's a great one too. There was actually one by Demi Lovato too. I think it's called Warrior. That really talks about all the things that she's overcome and the things that she's experienced have turned her into a warrior. The content is pretty similar to Christina Aguilera's Survivor, for anyone who's familiar with that. So I think those are the ones that come to mind. I'm sure there's more but I'm a little on a content overload right now. My brain isn't quite as functional. Firework by Katy Perry, it's another one. Yes, excellent. I love these suggestions. And I'm seeing that someone said that they're not seeing the crisis text line. So Yukiko, looks like you said that. I'm gonna send a message to you directly with the text line so you can access that, okay? And if there's more more questions, please feel free to keep them coming. Oh, wow, what did I do here? I just copied and pasted the giant thing. Here we go. And thank you everyone so much for the nice compliments that I see coming in. There we go. How can I assist my students currently living in on-campus housing? Depends on what you mean by assist. So if you're talking about more like basic immediate needs, you know, we do have the food pantry. We have a lot of like social services types of resources available. If you want to contact me directly, you absolutely can. We do have a counselor who works with Res Life. Her name is Marilyn Mendoza. And she is really our go-to resident expert for our students who live on campus. And for any mental health services, obviously we are here to serve you, so please send any students in our direction as well. Let me see if did I miss any questions here? And hopefully that answers the question, but if you have any additional questions, please, or if I missed something that you're looking for, please feel free to clarify. And then, oh, Allison, again, my colleague from UCS is pointing out that on our website, we do have some resources available. So I definitely encourage you all to check out the website too. All right. And then Kira's sending the link down there. First link for the Google form. Second link is for the, I'm guessing, yes, the evaluation. All right, so if there's no more questions, then I just want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join me today. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. It's also my first time doing a webinar, so hopefully it wasn't too dry. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated this. We also have another webinar tomorrow. It is at 2 p.m. and it's talking about being productive with your classes during online courses. So please check that out, and don't forget to check out the links. And we have our CSUN AS virtual events page, which has a bunch more resources, and a lot of different departments on campus are also hosting virtual programs, so be sure to check those out. I think there's also more mental health resources. They're doing the Community Health and Wellbeing hosts workshops every Mondays. They do Mindfulness Mondays, and they also have workshops on Wednesdays. And you can find their stuff online as well. And they also have an Instagram account. So lots of stuff out there. So thank you so much. If there's any more questions, you can please feel free to reach out to CSUN AS as well. And we will be posting all of these videos as resources for you in the future, so you can go back and listen and remember all the good content on the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.